Welcome to another deep dive. We're taking your suggestions and diving deep into them. You know how it works. You send us the fascinating material, and we extract the core insights.
Exactly. We want to equip you with a rapid yet thorough understanding, all without leaving you feeling overwhelmed. You could say we're giving you a shortcut to knowledge.
This time, we're tackling a book that's clearly touched many of you, El Poder de la Hora, or The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle.
A book often lauded as a masterpiece. It's considered a really significant work in the world of spiritual guidance, with a growing number of devoted readers. Some even say it has the power to truly transform your perspective on life.
So let's dive in.
Absolutely.
What's the core of Tolle's message, and what makes it resonate with so many?
Well, to understand the book, you need to understand a little bit about the author, Eckhart Tolle. His story, the path that led him to write The Power of Now, is anything but ordinary.
It sounds like his early life was filled with quite a bit of inner turmoil.
Oh, absolutely. Tolle grappled with intense anxiety, even battling suicidal depression. That's heavy stuff.
Really heavy. This went on for a long time until he reached a turning point at the age of 29. He had a profound awakening experience. Think of it as a total shift in his understanding of himself and the world around him.
So a real before and after moment.
Exactly. And for the 2 decades that followed, he really dedicated himself to understanding this transformation. Through deep reflection, through meditation, you could say this period of introspection formed the foundation for the teachings that eventually became The Power of Now.
Interesting. So how did he make the leap from personal experience to becoming a spiritual teacher? What's the core message he started to convey?
Well, it's fascinating. Tolle's core message resonates with the wisdom of figures like Christ and Buddha, emphasizing that enlightenment, that liberation from suffering, isn't some distant goal.
It's attainable now, right here, right now in the present moment. And the power of now itself emerged organically from Tolle's interactions with individuals and small groups. Many of the insights in the book were actually responses to questions he received during seminars, meditation classes, and even private counseling sessions.
It's almost like we're getting a glimpse into those early teachings.
Precisely. And the question and answer style of the book is very deliberate. It really reinforces that sense of directness and personal connection. And as the preface mentions, the book isn't just meant to be read once and put away. It's designed to be read and reread, kind of like a guide, a complete course in meditation and self-realization. E-reading can unveil deeper layers of meaning.
And Tolle's language is very accessible, isn't it?
Very much so. He intentionally uses clear and neutral terms to avoid getting bogged down in complex spiritual jargon. You can tell his intention is to reach a broad audience, regardless of their background. He presents a timeless spiritual experience, an inner knowing, free from specific religious or philosophical frameworks. He's speaking from his own inner experience, hoping to resonate with that same place within the reader.
So there's a very personal, almost intimate quality to his writing.
You get that sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now that we have a better understanding of Tolle and the genesis of the power of now, let's delve into the heart of his message. Where do we even begin to unravel the complexities of human existence? What is the fundamental problem that he identifies?
Well, he seems to pinpoint our identification with the mind as the main culprit, leading us down a path of, suffering.
Precisely. Our relentless identification with the mind, that's the real obstacle to experiencing true reality and inner peace. This identification gives rise to what Tolle calls compulsive thinking. It's that constant stream of thoughts, that mental chatter that just never seems to stop.
We all know that feeling, right? That incessant internal monologue.
Exactly. And that mental noise, that's what prevents us from accessing that inner stillness, the state of being that Tolle equates with our true self. This constant thinking creates a false sense of self, the ego, which is essentially constructed from our thoughts and beliefs, leading to a lot of unnecessary fear and suffering.
He even takes on Descartes, doesn't he? The famous, I think, therefore I am.
He does. Tolle views that statement, equating thinking with being, with our true essence, as a fundamental error. He argues that we mistakenly identify with the ever-shifting flow of thoughts, which ultimately creates a world of separation and endless problems. These problems are really just a reflection of the fragmented state of our minds.
So this identification with our thoughts creates a sense of disconnect, both from ourselves and from the world around us. But what's the alternative?
For Tolle, enlightenment represents a state of wholeness. It's a deep connection with all of life, both the manifested world around us and that unmanifested essence he refers to as being. This state brings an end to suffering, conflict, and frees us from that terrifying slavery of incessant thought.
Wow, that's powerful. So how do we break free from this mental grip? It seems like this is where the power of now really comes into play.
You got it. The present moment, that's all we ever truly have. Tolle urges us to make the now the primary focus of our lives.
He talks about changing our relationship with time, which seems like a pretty radical concept. How do we actually do that?
He suggests a fundamental shift. Most of us dwell in the past and the future with only brief, accidental visits to the now. He proposes that we flip that script, residing in the now as our natural state and only visiting the past or future for practical purposes, those things relevant to this moment.
And what's the key to anchoring ourselves in the present?
Acceptance, saying yes to what is, resisting the present moment, the reality of right now, that's a losing battle. It only creates inner conflict and more suffering.
So meeting life on its own terms, without resistance.
Exactly. As Tolle puts it, surrender to what is, say yes to life, and see how life starts working for you rather than against you.
Now, this idea of surrender resonates with many spiritual traditions, but Tolle also brings in the concept of the pain body, which is a term I haven't encountered before. Can you elaborate on what that is?
Of course. So some spiritual teachings talk about suffering as being an illusion, but Tolle emphasizes that this needs to be realized experientially, not just as an intellectual concept. He uses the term pain body to describe the accumulation of negative emotional energy that gets trapped within us, and it becomes sort of separate from our total life energy because of our identification with the mind.
It sounds like a reservoir of unresolved emotional baggage.
In a way, yes. And this trapped energy becomes semi-autonomous, almost like a parasitic entity.
It thrives on more pain.
You got it. It actively seeks out or even creates negative situations to sustain itself. It's like the emotional shadow of the ego, always looking for negativity to justify its existence.
That it's a self-perpetuating cycle.
A vicious one. But becoming aware of this dynamic is the first step towards breaking free.
Okay, so how do we disentangle ourselves from the clutches of the pain body?
Tolle highlights the power of conscious observation. You need to bring your attention to the pain body, feel its energy within you, but do so without judgment or resistance. As you become the watcher, the identification weakens. A higher level of awareness, that presence Tolle talks about, begins to emerge.
So awareness, being present with it, that's what diminishes its power over us.
Exactly. By becoming the conscious witness, you disidentify from it. The pain body can't operate in the light of your awareness. It can't masquerade as you anymore, and it can't feed off your unconscious reactions. You reclaim your power, your freedom, by stepping into the now.
So instead of trying to suppress or fight it, we simply observe.
Precisely. Acceptance, that's the key. The pain body thrives in darkness, in the shadows of our unconsciousness, but awareness is like shining a light on it. It can't survive in that light. Tolle quotes St. Paul here, "Everything is manifested by the light, and everything that is manifested is light." It's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? Instead of fighting it, just observe it. Accept it as part of the present moment, and that acceptance, that non-resistance, allows it to be transmuted, to be transformed.
He also talks about this process being especially relevant for women.
Yes. Tolle observes that for many women, the pain body becomes very active in the time leading up to menstruation. It's like it has a cyclical resurgence. He suggests that this period offers a very powerful opportunity for spiritual growth. If a woman can stay present during this time, observing her internal experience without being completely overwhelmed by it, she can accelerate the process of transmuting that accumulated pain.
It's like a concentrated period for inner work.
Exactly. He also talks about that peculiar pleasure we sometimes find in being unhappy.
We've all been there.
He encourages us to notice any resistance we might have to facing our own pain, and to become aware of that strange comfort we sometimes find in dwelling in unhappiness. It's often unconscious. By becoming aware of it, we begin to dissolve the resistance, and that allows us to then observe and transmute the pain body.
It's like bringing those hidden, shadowy parts of ourselves into the light.
Yes. And Tolle also highlights how being in the presence of a conscious individual, someone who embodies that state of presence, can be profoundly beneficial. Their presence can help us access that same state within ourselves more easily. He compares it to a dimly lit log placed next to a burning fire. The heat from the fire makes it more likely for the log to ignite.
That's a great analogy. So their presence acts as a catalyst for our own awakening.
Precisely. Okay, so far we've talked about the problem of identifying with the mind and a powerful way to address it, by harnessing the power of now and consciously observing the pain body. But now let's move on to what Tolle calls the spiritual dimension, How do we access that?
It sounds pretty mystical.
It can be. Tolle points out that in moments of extreme danger, life or death situations, we often experience an immediate shift in consciousness. The ego, with its worries about the past and future, momentarily recedes. It's replaced by an intense, alert presence, and any action that needs to be taken arises spontaneously from that state.
So in those moments of crisis, we're pulled into the now.
Naturally. And he talks about how this might explain why some people are drawn to risky activities, things like mountain climbing or extreme sports.
Because it forces them into the present.
Right. In those situations, a lapse in attention, a wandering mind, can have serious consequences. It demands presence. But Tolle stresses that you don't need to seek out danger to experience this state. You can choose to enter it directly through conscious effort.
And he connects this idea of presence to Zen philosophy.
He does. The essence of Zen is about living on that edge of this move. Now, being so completely present that nothing can take root in you.
Not even suffering.
Exactly, because suffering, it requires time to exist. But in the time ceases to have any real meaning.
He mentions a specific question used in Zen practice to bring awareness to the present moment.
Oh, yes. The Zen master Rinzai, he would often raise his finger and ask, what is lacking at this moment? And it's not an intellectual question. It's a direct pointer to draw your attention into the now.
What a powerful practice. He uses a vivid example of looking at a tree to illustrate the shift in perception, doesn't he?
He does. Someone described looking at a familiar tree, one they'd seen countless times before, but suddenly they saw it with fresh eyes. They perceived an underlying essence, a spirit within it. It was a profound connection. Before, they had only seen a flat, almost dead image. But in that moment, they experienced the tree's true being. It was a shift from the abstract world of the mind to the aliveness of the present moment.
That's beautiful. It's moving beyond a superficial understanding to a deep engagement with reality. But what about the very real problems we face in our lives? Tolle seems to suggest they're illusions of the mind.
He does. And it might sound counterintuitive, but think about it. When your attention is fully in the calm, now, can you truly have a problem at that very moment? Situations exist, yes, things that need to be addressed or accepted, but the mental label problem, that arises from our dwelling in the past or the future. The mind loves problems, you see.
Why is that?
Because they provide a sense of identity. We define ourselves by our problems. A problem, in Tolle's view, arises when we get stuck in the mind, dwelling on a situation without any possibility of taking action now, and we unconsciously integrate that mental rumination into our sense of self.
So our problems become part of our self-image.
Exactly. And Tolle emphasizes that we have a choice. We can choose to not create more pain for ourselves through our thinking, no matter what the external circumstances may be. It's a simple but radical decision, and it requires accessing the power of now.
And he links this idea of problems to our experience of fear.
Yes, he says that so much of our thinking and doing is driven by fear. And fear is always connected to the future, to what might happen. But in the fear, now there are no problems, and therefore no real fear.
So when we're present, we're fearless.
In essence, yes. And the actions that arise from that state of presence, they're clear, decisive, and effective. They're not reactions based on past conditioning. They're intuitive responses to the situation at hand.
So this points to a fundamental shift in how we perceive and experience reality. Tolle even talks about a quantum leap in consciousness, doesn't he?
He does. He views our usual time-bound consciousness as a deeply ingrained pattern in the human psyche. But he believes humanity is undergoing a profound transformation, a collective awakening from this illusion of separateness, of a purely material existence. It's a move towards the end of psychological time as we know it. It's about breaking free from mental patterns that have dominated human experience for millennia.
So the root of the problem isn't our external circumstances, it's our internal state, our disconnection from the now.
That's it. It's the loss of the death. Now, the delusion that transforms neutral situations into suffering, that disconnects us from our essential being. And freedom from time, as Tolle sees it, is freedom from needing the past to define us and the future to fulfill us.
And this shift in consciousness, it's an ongoing process, isn't it? It's not like we just flip a switch.
It's a journey, a gradual unfolding. The first step is simply noticing how seldom our attention is actually in the present. Even the act of noticing that our mind has wandered, that's a moment of presence. And then, with increasing intention, we choose to redirect our attention to the night, rather than being swept away by the current of our thoughts.
And Tolle links this resistance to the now to some pretty big societal issues.
Oh, absolutely. He sees our collective resistance to the present moment as a deep-seated dysfunction that underpins many of the problems in our world. It's the root of our unhappy and often violent industrial civilization, a civilization that's become a threat to the very planet that sustains us. It all stems from that fundamental disconnect from being.
So our individual struggles with presence contribute to these global challenges?
Yes, in a way. He talks about ordinary unconsciousness, and it's something we all engage in. It shows up in everyday things like complaining.
We're all guilty of that from time to time.
Complaining is always a form of non-acceptance. It carries a negative energy. It reinforces the victim mentality. Tolle suggests a more empowered approach. If there's a situation you're unhappy with, you can choose to take action to change it. Communicate your needs clearly, remove yourself from it, or fully accept it. Anything else just creates more suffering.
It's about taking responsibility for our experience.
Absolutely. And he emphasizes taking action from a place of presence, not negativity. If action is needed, release the negativity first. Action that arises from a clear understanding is always more effective than action driven by emotions like anger or frustration.
So it's not about suppressing our feelings, but about acting from a place of awareness.
Exactly. And he cautions against letting future goals overshadow the present moment. If we constantly view the now as just a stepping stone to some future destination, we'll never be satisfied. We'll always be chasing that elusive, better future and end up perpetually dissatisfied.
It's about finding fulfillment in the journey itself.
Precisely. And Tolle also points out that we don't need to endlessly analyze our past. We don't need to dig into our unconscious history except as it manifests in this present moment. The past only matters in how it's shaping our experience right now. He says that the present moment will naturally bring to the surface whatever from the past needs to be addressed.
So we don't need to get lost in the past.
Right. Focusing on the past can become an endless loop, and believing that the future holds the answers to our past issues is a delusion. True liberation from the past, that can only happen in the now.
Okay, we've talked about the power of presence, of the now. Now, Tolle introduces the concept of the unmanifested. What is that exactly?
The unmanifested. It's the ultimate reality, the silent ground of all being, the source from which everything arises. You could call it God if you like, but it's beyond any concept or label we can put on it. From our limited, time-bound perspective, it might seem like it's in a process of development, but in the timeless realm of the unmanifested, beginning and end are one.
So it's the underlying essence of all existence.
Yes. And Tolle suggests that the evolution of consciousness is a journey towards realizing this unmanifested reality within ourselves, becoming pure consciousness, pure presence. He believes this awakening has already happened in individuals, and that it's destined to happen on a larger scale, a collective shift in human consciousness.
That's a hopeful thought.
It is. But he also warns about the dangers of the egoic mind. The ego, trapped in identification with thoughts, with form, is inherently destructive. And transcending the limitations of the ego, that's essential for our individual and collective well-being. In fact, he goes so far as to say that the collective egoic mind has become a dangerous force on the planet. If we don't wake up from this egoic delusion, we risk irreversible damage.
So connecting with the unmanifested, that's crucial for moving beyond the destructiveness of the ego. How do we do that?
There are several portals, entry points into the unmanifested. One is through cultivating a state of intense presence. When you're truly present, gaps appear in the stream of thought, moments of stillness, of pure awareness.
Like those moments of silence between the notes of a song.
Exactly. And he gives the example of Zen masters who would test their students' presence by doing something unexpected, like striking them suddenly.
That'll wake you up.
It's to see if they were fully present or lost in thought. And Tolle emphasizes that a true spiritual teacher acts as a mirror, reflecting your own inner light back to you. They help you see your own true nature, your inherent enlightenment.
So it's not about them being the source of wisdom, but about helping us access the wisdom that's already within us.
Precisely. And group practices, meditation circles, those can also amplify presence, creating a collective field of energy that supports awakening. But ultimately, the real transformation that happens within each individual.
We have to do the inner work.
Exactly. And he points out that this transformation happens within our physical bodies. It's not about denying the body or trying to have out-of-body experiences. The body is the vessel for our enlightenment, not an obstacle to overcome.
So it's about integrating the spiritual and the physical.
Yes, it's about wholeness. And Tolle also mentions other pathways to the unmanifested, like silence and space.
How do those work?
Well, the unmanifested, it's not separate from the world. It permeates everything.
Mm-hmm.
And silence is a doorway to that. He encourages us to pay attention to the silence between sounds, to cultivate inner stillness by focusing on outer silence. Silence is like the unmanifested dimension of all sound, and maybe nothing in our world reflects the divine as profoundly as silence. Even conversation, being mindful of those spaces between words, that can cultivate inner quietude.
It's like finding the stillness within the noise.
Exactly. And then there's space. Outer space, the vastness of the universe, and inner space, the stillness within us. Those are really two aspects of the same thing. They're both expressions of the same fundamental nothingness, the creative matrix from which all of existence arises. But most of us are largely unconscious of this inner dimension. And that leads to a lot of imbalance and fear in our lives.
So it's about connecting with that vastness within us.
Yes. And Tolle also talks about relationships as a form of spiritual practice. He has a really unique perspective on this.
What makes his perspective different?
He observes that many romantic relationships, what he calls special relationships, often become ego-driven. They become a substitute for our own sense of wholeness, and that leads to dependency and ultimately to pain. We project all our unmet needs and desires onto our partners, and when they inevitably fail to meet those expectations, we suffer.
So relationships can become a breeding ground for egoic patterns.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Tolle sees crises within relationships as opportunities for awakening. He believes that humanity is under immense pressure to evolve, and that pressure is particularly acute in our close relationships. He says that relationships are not primarily meant to make us happy, but to make us conscious. That's a challenging but liberating perspective.
So it's not about finding the perfect partner, but about using relationships as a mirror for our own growth.
Precisely. And he also explores the concepts of the feminine and masculine principles.
This is a theme that comes up in a lot of spiritual traditions.
It does. And Tolle suggests that women are generally more in touch with their bodies and therefore have a more direct connection to being, which he sees as the essence of the feminine principle. Many ancient cultures used feminine figures to symbolize the formless, transcendental reality, the creative matrix of all life.
But as the mind gained dominance, that perspective shifted, didn't it?
It did. As men became more disconnected from being, the concept of God became increasingly masculine, and societies became more patriarchal.
But he's not advocating for a simple return to those old feminine representations.
No, he sees value in restoring balance between the masculine and feminine, but he emphasizes that those are ultimately concepts. The energy of the mind, he says, is essentially masculine, active, controlling, while the energy of being is more feminine, receptive, yielding, but ultimately more powerful. Being is what governs the underlying flow of life, while the mind governs our civilization. And while women might have a more natural access to being, men can certainly access it as well.
And he revisits the pain body in the context of these feminine and masculine principles.
Yes. He observes that women are particularly susceptible to being dominated by the pain body, especially around the time of menstruation. It can speak through them, act through them, even think through them, creating negative experiences that feed it. But he also notes that more women than men are moving towards conscious awareness. He sees women reclaiming their role as a bridge between the manifested world and the unmanifested.
So the transmutation of the pain body is crucial for women.
He believes so. And the intense presence cultivated through that process that also helps them transcend identification with the mind. But he cautions against clinging to a collective victim identity, focusing on what men have done to women, because that can actually keep them trapped in the pain body and block their true power.
It perpetuates separation.
Exactly. And he gives a specific practice for women to use during their premenstrual phase. It's about cultivating heightened awareness, inhabiting the body fully, and catching the very first sign of the pain body's activation, whether it's a feeling of irritation, a surge of anger, or even a physical symptom. And then bringing full attention to it, recognizing it for what it is, the pain body, not you. And that presence, that awareness, acts like a solvent, dissolving the pain body.
So it's about being present with those difficult emotions without getting swept away by them.
Exactly. And he also mentions that conscious male partners can support women in this process by maintaining their own state of presence.
So it's a shared journey.
In a way, yes. And speaking of relationships, Tolle also talks about their deeper spiritual purpose. He says that truly profound connection with another person can only happen when we're both grounded in our being, when we can see beyond the surface level of personality and form. In that space, there's no separation between male and female. It's pure oneness.
And he points out that our essential being is already whole and complete.
Yes. While our forms might have needs and desires, being doesn't lack anything. The fulfillment of external needs can be enjoyable, but it doesn't change our fundamental state of inner peace. He says that even enlightened individuals can experience hardship or lack on the external level, but remain completely whole and at peace within.
So true fulfillment comes from within, not from external circumstances.
Exactly. And he revisits the themes of acceptance and surrender, which we touched upon earlier. He observes that most of us need to experience a certain amount of suffering before we're willing to let go of resistance and embrace acceptance. But when that surrender happens, when we truly forgive, it can lead to an awakening of being, a transformation of suffering into peace. He believes the ultimate purpose of all the seeming evil and suffering in the world is to help us realize our true identity beyond form.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture.
Yes, and forgiveness is essential in this process. It's about recognizing the illusory nature of the past and allowing the present moment to be as it is. That creates a space of intense presence that not only transforms you, but also affects those around you.
It ripples outward.
It does. And he talks about the end of drama, which seems like a tall order given how much drama there is in the world.
It does, doesn't it?
He believes that when we operate from the ego, conflict and suffering are inevitable, whether it's in our personal relationships or on a larger scale. Collective evils like war, those are just expressions of mass unconsciousness. And he even suggests that many diseases are caused by the ego's resistance, the blockages it creates in the flow of life energy. Reconnecting with being, that's the key to ending the drama, both within ourselves and in the world.
So healing on a personal level contributes to healing on a collective level.
Exactly. And he suggests we can learn from nature simply by observing animals.
What can we learn from animals?
Well, animals live in the now. Their conflicts are usually brief, and they don't hold on to the past. They release the energy and move on. They don't have the kind of mind that dwells on things and creates stories. So just watching animals can be a form of meditation or a reminder to be present.
It's about embodying that natural state of being.
Yes. And Tolle also talks about compassion. True compassion, he says, arises from recognizing our interconnectedness with all beings. It has two aspects. First, there's the recognition of our shared vulnerability, the fact that we're all subject to the same physical laws, that we all face death, and that brings humility. And then there's the understanding of the immortal dimension within us, the realization that our true nature is eternal, and that same essence is present in all beings. True compassion blends that sense of shared sorrow with a deep joy, the joy of being. It's a profound peace, the peace of God, and has immense healing power.
It's about seeing beyond the illusion of separation.
Exactly. And he ends the book by talking about the potential for a transformation of the world.
It sounds like a utopian vision.
It might seem that way, but he believes it's possible. He sees the world as it is now as a reflection of the collective egoic mind, dominated by fear. But as more and more individuals awaken from that delusion, their inner transformation will have a ripple effect. It'll create a shift in planetary consciousness, a new world.
So it starts with each of us.
It does. And he talks about the role of true teaching in action. He says that real teaching is about being, not just about the words or actions. It's about embodying that state of presence. And while compassionate action is important, he emphasizes that true healing happens in the shared moment of being.
So it's not just about fixing the problems of the world, but about addressing the root cause, which is unconsciousness.
Exactly. And when we do take action, he encourages us to do so from a place of peace, to let our inner state inform our actions. It's about working on both the cause and the effect. Even when we oppose destructive forces in the world, we should avoid hatred or negativity within ourselves. True change starts within.
And finally, he returns to the power of acceptance and surrender.
Yes. The inability to accept what is, that's what hardens the ego. It creates separation. It makes us see threats everywhere, and that leads to judgment, competition, domination. Surrendering to the present moment dissolves that resistance and connects us to the power of being. Even difficult situations, what he calls limit situations, can become catalysts for awakening. They intensify the suffering till we finally surrender, and that surrender is what creates the miracle.
So it's not about giving up or becoming passive, but about finding that place of inner alignment?
Exactly. And he clarifies that detachment from our feelings isn't the same as surrender. It's about being present with our emotions without identifying with them. And even in those moments when acceptance feels impossible, there's always another opportunity to surrender.
It's an ongoing practice.
It is. And he explains how this deep surrender leads to an experience of the divine. Because resistance is so closely tied to the mind. When we surrender, the mind's dominance ends and the realm of being is revealed. And in that space, there's a profound peace, a deep joy, a love that surpasses understanding. And at the very core of it all is the sacred, the unnameable.
And he concludes with the discussion of choice. He has a very interesting perspective on that.
He does. He points out that those who seem to choose suffering are often operating unconsciously, driven by conditioned patterns. True choice, the ability to choose consciously, that requires presence. And true forgiveness, both of ourselves and others, is only possible in the now. When we access the power of now, the past loses its grip on us. We realize that our true essence was never touched by anything we've done or experienced.
So forgiveness becomes irrelevant.
In a way, yes, because there's nothing to forgive. Okay, so to wrap things up, the central message of the power of now, as we've explored it, is that the key to transforming our experience of life lies in embracing the present moment. It's about cultivating awareness of and disidentifying from the incessant chatter of the mind that creates so much of our suffering.
It's about waking up to the reality of now.
Precisely. And some key takeaways to keep in mind. Problems lose their solidity when we're truly present. Acceptance and surrender are incredibly powerful forces for transformation. And we all have the potential to experience profound inner peace, even glimpses of that unmanifested reality that underlies all existence.
It's a lot to ponder.
It is. And for you, dear listener, we leave you with this question. How much of your daily experience is actually shaped by conscious presence in the you-know versus preoccupation with the past or anxieties about the future? What might change for you if you experimented with bringing more of your attention to this very moment?
It's an invitation to explore, to discover the power of now for yourself.
We encourage you to revisit El Poder de la Hora with this new understanding and see what insights emerge for you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.
Take